Now, some of you may not recognize this particular gentleman, but this is Breivik, the guy that went to a camp and opened fire with assault weapons. And he was just in the news not too long ago complaining about his treatment in prison because he was given cold coffee. And as you can imagine, our hearts just break for him after killing innumerable people, mostly innocent people. So what I want to look at briefly is just aggression and how it actually works. And what we need to try to figure out how to do is to define aggression different from everyday usage, and basically look at the biological factors that lead to it. So in psychology, at least, aggression itself is any physical or verbal behavior intended to hurt or destroy. So let me write that out. So any physical behavior, physical behavior or verbal behavior that is intended to hurt or destroy. So needless to say, I can engage in very aggressive verbal behavior, and does it actually hurt the person physically? No, of course not. But it does hurt them emotionally. What's interesting, just a few days ago, I watched a documentary about PTSD in the military, and this is, again, one of those topics that we'll be talking about in crisis and trauma. And what's interesting to note is that a lot of soldiers won't go in and get help because they don't want to be, one, labeled, but secondly, they don't want to be discharged. And so they suffer in silence, basically. And particularly those who have experienced PTSD, who have no physical damage and physical injuries, per se, that people can look at, then oftentimes they feel even more shame when it comes to that. So this definition up here has a far more precise meaning than it does in everyday usage, where sometimes an assertive salesperson, if you were out on Black Friday and somebody tried to upsell you, if you're familiar with that term, they've tried to get you to buy more than you wanted, a warranty or something like that, and kept pressing you on it. Sometimes we would call that person aggressive. They're not attempting to hurt or destroy you. On the other hand, psychology's definition recognizes a verbally assaultive person or one who spreads a vicious rumor as aggressive. So we have to redefine, in some respects, from a common definition of aggressiveness to a more precise definition of aggressiveness, so that we can identify versus precise definition, so that we can identify what actual behaviors we need to identify as problematic behaviors. Now, don't think in zero-sum terms. In other words, if I say that one thing is aggressive and the other thing is not aggressive, it doesn't mean that it's any less important. It is a matter of precision in terms of what we're trying to identify when we talk about aggression itself. Typically, biological influences on aggressiveness. Let me just take a minute and unpack this particular aspect of it to you. Operate at a genetic, neural, and biochemical level. Animals have been bred for aggressiveness, and twin studies suggest that genes often influence human aggression. So animal and human brains have neural systems that, when stimulated, either inhibit or produce aggressive behavior. So we've got neural systems that are within us, a lot of it within the frontal lobe and the limbic system, that either inhibit aggressiveness or accentuate it. And these particular areas are what we tend to study when we're trying to understand what's going on with aggressiveness itself. So, for example, studies of violent criminals have revealed diminished activity in the frontal lobes, which is one of these areas where a lot of decision making and impulse control is centered. So decision making, impulse control are both a part of these frontal lobes, and you see them under firing, if you will, in violent criminals particularly. Finally, studies of the effect of hormones, for example, testosterone, and this is the hormonal level. Testosterone tends to make one more aggressive, is one of these key hormones that has been identified. Alcohol and other substances in the blood show that biochemical influences also, and remember I use these ETOH to signify alcohol, but this shows the biochemical features, if you will, in aggressiveness. Somebody who is drunk basically shows us how alcohol can have an impact on the lack of inhibition that typically holds that back for them. Now, some theories. Let's talk about some triggers of aggression. First, there is a principle that we refer to as the frustration aggression principle, which is a key theory, if you will, or principle that about what actually triggers aggressive behavior, aggression principle. And this particular theory or principle suggests that the blocking of an attempt to reach some goal creates anger, which can generate aggression. Frustration and by extension aggression can arise less from deprivation than from the gap between reality and expectations. Which the thing to keep in mind here is that gap that I just referred to, the gap between reality and the expectations one have. Most of the time, a lot of anger and frustration flows from not external things. External things are simply the trigger to internal states, which are usually tied into expectations themselves, and that the stimuli simply trigger it for us, essentially. The last thing to keep in mind is something that we refer to as the social script. And since Christmas is approaching, what we see here, which is a classic example, is the video games. The one that's really popular and I've seen a lot of late is Assassin's Creed, which can be played on PlayStation and various gaming consoles. But it is extremely violent, and it creates a script, essentially, that can heighten aggressive behavior because it provides us with a way to act to gain revenge, to gain a variety of goals, if you will, and in that sense, the goal justifies the means rather than the goal is important, but means are also equally important. And many of these games communicate that particular script when it comes to that, essentially. So those were our key principles, frustration aggression principle. It really is talking about external triggers that stimulate that have everything to do with the gap between reality and expectations, and then the whole idea of social scripts and what role it plays when we see and are involved in very hostile worlds when you look at the video gaming world itself.